Good evening. How did you like the detail of moving the water away so you can see Chelsea clearly? We love our team. How are you feeling about your phone right now? They're still off? Good. I'm Bruno Giussani, I'm the president of the festival, and the guest for the next hour is a very special guest. You know her. She became known in 2010 when she leaked a vast mass of documents about the behavior of the American army in Iraq and other things. She received the longest prison sentence ever given to a whistleblower, 35 years. She served 7 years, and then President Barack Obama gave her an unconditional commutation. She's now globally recognized as a public figure, both for her activism on privacy and on technology security, as well as being one of the most recognizable trans persons in the world. But tonight she's not here to talk about her past, she's here to talk about what we saw in the movie. That's the beginning of the discussion, meaning technology and us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chelsea Manning. How are you? Try just to make sure it works.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir, Chelsea. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Excellent, excellent. Chelsea, I want to start this conversation in 3 parts, and then at the end take questions from the public as well. The first is about the topic of the movie, so technology as several general questions. Then the second is about your current work for a Swiss company.
Yes.
And then maybe about the current global context, the war in Ukraine, cyber war, and things like that.
Yeah, the easy stuff.
The easy stuff, exactly. You know, kind of escalating towards the easy, and indeed. So, first of all, a reaction about the movie. Maybe I should say, for those who are watching online and could not see the movie, that we just saw here a film called Made to Measure, which is an artistic data experiment where a group of 3 artists from Berlin essentially took the data from 5 years of Google searches from a person they didn't know, and trying to recreate that person's doppelganger purely based on her Google searches. And it was pretty impressive. That's how I reacted. How did you react to the movie?
It sounds about right. Yeah,
sounds about right.
Yeah.
Accurate about
yes.
the way social media platforms work, the way tracking works?
Yes, so social media platforms gather far more information, they gather far more metadata than any other source of information that that's ever really been invented or created before, medical information, et cetera. So you're able to take all of these different data points and you're able to paint a very accurate picture, especially when you have many other sources of information in which to compare it with and to learn things that, and especially with machine learning, you're able to make connections with and between things that a human being wouldn't normally associate as being connected. So 2 data points that don't seem to be related can be related with the right kind of technology.
Can we kind of summarize that into a sentence that would say something like, algorithms know us better than we know ourselves? The woman herself was kind of surprised a couple of times in the movie about,
yes.
I didn't remember that, I wasn't sure that's not maybe the right framing or so.
Yes, I would agree with that statement, yes.
And also the fact, of course, that this data is captured and stayed forever. Like, she didn't remember that she ever lived above a betting parlor, and it was all there in the data, for example.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't say that it's forever. I mean, certainly it can be collected and it can be stored for a significant chunk of time. There is an expense that comes with storing that kind of information. And also, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go back later and say, oh, I want this information to be deleted or to be expunged. So I wouldn't forego that path in the future.
So the film was based on Google searches, but then Facebook was mentioned a couple of times, other social media platforms.
Right.
There is a small number of big tech companies that are incredibly present in our lives. How deep is the grip of these companies on our daily life?
It's very deep. So these companies have had a very significant impact on all of our daily lives for quite some time. Mostly, and I wrote this in the New York Times. I wrote, this is the dystopia that we signed up for, because we literally click agree and okay. So that, this is the world that we have ended up with. But I don't necessarily think that it is the end all be all. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking to anybody. I would be living in a cabin somewhere in the Western U.S. somewhere. So
there is a label that's starting to stick. It's been around for a few years by Shoshana Zuboff, describing this phenomenon as surveillance capitalism.
Yes.
What concerns you most in this kind of tech-driven recent form of capitalism?
I think that there was some examples in the film that we just watched where, it's sort of like there are good surveillance. We have good methods of surveillance, right? This idea that, if we just give a little bit of information about that's rare, that's extremely private, but we do it for a good purpose, then it'll be okay. But that's usually a gateway towards abuse and use down the line, I find, or a way of washing or creating a more palatable means of allowing surveillance into your life. So, it starts off with, this prevents infections from, Google discovered influenza was being spread by its searches, and it started to look for it. But, it was using personal data to do that in searches. And then later on, we've had other examples of this. So, these are used as entry points into, okay, we're going to surveil you so we can use targeted ads. We're going to surveil you so you become the product. And yeah.
So the idea here is basically software is eating our privacy by absorbing data.
Right.
By capturing our daily experience in the form of data points. Who's responsible for this? Is it the software developers? Is it the users? Is this a sort of unspoken joint venture between the unthinking developer and the unthinking user?
Yeah, I think that I have two arguments. Mm-hmm. So the first is that the technologists, the people who design and develop the stuff, absolutely have an ethical obligation in understanding what they're creating, in understanding the consequences of the technology that they're developing. On the other hand, I think that the public also needs to realize that, because the public is aware. This isn't an education problem. This is not an awareness problem. We all know, that our information is being used and abused. We know this, it's on in the news every day. Everybody knows this collectively. But what are we doing? Are we just giving up? Are we just expecting someone else to come along and solve this problem? I think that there is a little bit of responsibility, but the ultimate responsibility, in my opinion, are on those of us who developed this technology, those of us who design this stuff, those of us who really understand how this stuff works, or we are delving into areas where we don't understand something, but where we're using you all as guinea pigs, essentially. You are test subjects. Oftentimes, whenever it comes to a project or a solution or a program, you're essentially being used as the metrics. There isn't an experiment. There isn't a training data or synthetic data that's being used to clear the stuff out.
How do you bring responsibility and to the developers? There have been countless examples of attempts at codes of ethics and self-control approaches, self-governance. They didn't really work. Even made a dent. How do we bring accountability and responsibility?
It has to come from developers. It has to come from, the people who design and develop this stuff need to really, like, here's the thing. Doctors, for instance, have obligations. They have ethical obligations. They're expected, lawyers have ethical obligations. They're expected to obey a certain practice. They, and if they don't, they get kicked out. They have a board and all this, like you have consequences if you don't abide by certain ethical standards and protocols, because somebody goes, if you're a lawyer, somebody goes to prison or somebody loses a lot of money, in a civil case, or their privacy is violated from attorney-client privilege. As a doctor, somebody can die. Like somebody can die, like there can be a public health issue or whatever. So technologists, the people who design and develop machine learning applications and use big data and use this stuff have impact to so many more people. But why are we held to a lower ethical standard? Why don't we have ethical boards? Why don't we have all these different expectations? Why don't we have like an equivalent to the Hippocratic Oath? Like why is it that people who design and develop this technology don't have these standards?
It's just a question of technology is developing so fast and policy, say, or regulation is not following fast enough? Or is there something more deeper, cultural?
There's not enough time either to figure it out, because like it's impacting millions of people by the time you figure out, that something is wrong. And, and oftentimes somebody will be arguing or making a case that there is a potential harm with a system and it's identified very early on, but it's deliberately ignored or suppressed. I can think of a good example of this is Google recently fired two of its most high-profile AI experts who worked at the ethical AI division, and they're essentially shutting down the ethical AI division because they brought it in. They sold this thing as being this big okay, we're going to do ethics in AI, and we're going to really focus on trying to do artificial intelligence and machine learning that is ethical. And then they started to do their job, and then Google was like, oh wait, we didn't actually mean that you actually do that. We just wanted your office. We wanted the title, and so they closed it.
It's true, no, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about your current job, but before that, you use Twitter, you don't use Facebook, which has been mentioned in the film. Why don't you use Facebook?
I don't use Facebook now, Meta.
So. Now Meta, absolutely, which means that you don't use Instagram either. I mean,
I do use Instagram. It's separate. The databases are separate, but I don't have a Facebook, for instance. A lot of that has to do with just my concerns about Facebook information in particular. That said, I am a bit of a hypocrite because I do have a TikTok and I do use TikTok, and that there's just as much issue with that.
Yes, indeed. So now you work as, and you gave me this title last time we spoke, hardware security optimization expert.
Yes.
For a 4-year-old startup based in Switzerland, based in Neuchâtel, called Nym, NYM.
Yes.
Which works on next generation privacy infrastructure.
Correct.
Before we try to explain what you do and what the company does, how did you get to work for a Swiss company?
So it was founded by an American, so that's a starting point.
Immediate bond, yes.
Yeah, so a friend of mine, actually, Harry Halpin, is the CEO of the company. Harry and I have known each other for quite some time. We've worked on other tech projects together before. Previously, email. There was an encrypted email proposal that he came up with that I was like, yeah, I guess this would work. That seems all right. But Harry came up to me he texted me in February of last year. So February 2021, Harry texted me and asked me to review a paper that he and the Nym people were working on since they wanted to get my opinion about something. I looked at it and I'm like, oh, I actually, this is an idea that I had in 2016. So we had both sort of come up with this idea independently and had slightly different approaches to how to come about it. I had some questions. We worked it out. He then called me and wanted to hire me to do a security audit to review the system, see if it would work and where the issues might be. So I spent the next 6 to 8 months working on this, delving into the details of how Nym works, how the infrastructure works, and how it would, and whether it would do what it would say. Does it, does it actually do what it says on the tin, so to speak? And this is what I spent the next few months doing. I completed this. I identified some areas where I had some concerns, and I put it in a report. They were very happy with this. And then Harry called me, and he's like, "Hey, I recognize that you have some concerns about this particular part, and one of the areas that I really wanted to focus on was on, I talked to Harry about this, was I wanted to focus on hardware. I wanted to focus on, because everybody's talking about software, and this is a software tool, but I want to speed things up. I wanted to make things more efficient. I wanted to make things easier, because it is a very computationally intensive thing. In order to do this. And so looking forward, since we're so early in this project, I want to come up with ways, also with other Swiss organizations, like RISC-V International, to come up with ways of having chips that may already exist on the market, but find the ones that optimize the process and make it go faster. And also more secure, because if you use hardware instead of software to secure things through encryption, it works better, but it's also more secure. It's harder to find vulnerabilities. It's harder. I mean, the iPhone, for instance, does this. Almost everything on the iPhone is hardware encrypted from the get-go. Like you don't see it, you don't notice it, you don't notice that everything is happening on your phone is actually encrypted. But it is.
Okay, so that's what you do at a company, but let's start to decrypt what the company does and then how that bursts in. So when we read Nym's documentation on the website, we learn things like it's developing a, quote, a combination of decentralized mixed nets and credentialed systems. It aims to offer privacy as a service and so on. So let's bring this down maybe one level so that we, average internet users, can understand what the company does and make it simple. And maybe let's break it into 2 different parts. One is why this is needed, and the second, what's the answer that Nyms gives? Because on the why, there is already a layer of the internet that is kind of, some sort of next gen or good privacy infrastructure. That's the Tor network,
right?
And which allows for considering information from traffic analysis and surveillance. So,
yes.
Why is something like Tor no longer sufficient to the point that you think you need to develop another generation of privacy infrastructure?
It's because computationally it's getting easier. It's getting much easier to identify traffic on a network. So basically, whenever it comes to how stuff works on the internet, it's very simplistic, but you try to send a message, you have a communication from point A to point B. So you are person A talking to person B. Now, in order to do that, you have to go over like C. You have to go over the network. Now then, what Tor does, or actually I'll start with a VPN, because what a VPN does is basically simpler and much more widely available than Tor. A VPN essentially gives you a third party, so you go to third party C and you say, hey, I want you to encrypt all of my traffic, have it flow through this network. That way, point A and people that see the network can't really see what's happening with the traffic, but they can see your connection between point A and point B. So they can see that there's traffic occurring on the network between point A and point B. That still tells you a lot about what's happening. It still tells you what time you're talking to each other, what kind of information is being sent based on its size. So there's all this metadata that's sort of associated with that. So that's like a little bit of protection. It's sort of like putting a lock on your door. Now then, going up a step, you have your Tor. Tor does this, but it does it randomly. So you get a random number of nodes all throughout the world, and it bounces traffic between point A and point B. So that way, you send a signal and you say, hey, I want to send information to point B, and point B wants to send information to point A, and it goes through this whole thing where it's B, C, D, E, all the way up to like
never in the same sequence, just
and it's very random. The problem is that while this was very difficult to track 10 or 15 years ago, in the last 5, 10 years, it's gotten a lot cheaper and it's gotten a lot easier. You no longer have to be like a government agency like the British GCHQ or the U.S. National Security Agency. You no longer have to be these like global surveillance actors to identify different points on the network and see what traffic is going where and having the same problem. We're back to square one. What Nym does is it puts a shroud around that. It's sort of like actually putting it inside of a safe, right? Instead of just locking your door, now you're actually getting it safe. So it puts a shroud around it so you can't see the connections that are happening on the network between point A and point B. It's very difficult. It uses cryptography. It uses a packet. It sort of like uses a ledger to manage where the packets are going and things like that between the connections. And so it uses all of these different tools in order to sort of create an envelope or a tent around the traffic. So that way you don't have to have these problems.
What's the vision about privacy as a service? How in the vision will people be able to use this practically?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's what we're trying to work out. We're trying to work out what applications you can do on this. It's working. It's a functional system, so it's working today. Like you can actually use this, but there's nothing. There's no you can't log into a website. You can't visit a web page or. You can't do transactions or anything on the network. I think you can do some cryptographic transactions and things. I think, but it's very new. It's not a practical thing yet, but it is getting there, and we're trying to encourage people to design and develop tools and applications, and maybe even tools and applications that we don't have a regular internet equivalent to yet, stuff that's a little bit, thinking more down the line in terms of like the infrastructure. Maybe email isn't the best approach of doing something. Maybe text messaging isn't the best way of communicating with people. Let's see if we can come up with other ways of doing verification for things. How do we make sure that that information is from who they say they are? How are you signing this information? How are you verifying this? Who's vetting this? How does this web of trust get formed? So I think that what we're at is we have an infrastructure. We built roads, but now we need to design cars, to go on those roads.
So I'm quite sure that many people here are thinking now, this sounds very complicated. Certainly
it's very
deep,
complicated.
but it's very complicated. And one of the problems with privacy online is that the higher the level of privacy, the lower the convenience in using it. It becomes more complex.
That's what we're trying to get. That's what we're trying to get around. So just like VPNs. VPNs were very hard to use. I remember
10 years ago, very difficult.
10 years ago, very difficult to use. Now you go to like a website. I won't give you a VPN, but you get ads for them every 5 seconds on YouTube. So, but yeah, you get a VPN now. It's very easy, and people get them all the time, and it's relatively easy. We're trying to do that. We're trying to do that with. Now I don't do the UX, the user experience stuff. I'm just there to make it faster. I'm not there to make it easier for you, but I'm trying to make it faster. Because right now, even if you did have a fancy way of, even if you did have like a fancy screen in which you just hit a button and you're like connect and you're like boop, and it works, then it's very slow. So that's the problem that I'm trying to get around, is trying to make it faster.
So you mentioned using ledgers to track the traffic. I mean, that's a byword for blockchain.
It is.
Blockchain technology.
It is not a cryptocurrency.
No, we're going to talk about cryptocurrency in a second, but one of the things that is very often discussed about now when it comes to blockchain is energy usage.
Yes.
High energy usage for the little traffic that is now relatively little. How do you approach that? How do you respond to that? I assume that's part of your job as optimizing hardware.
Yes. So the whole point of this is we don't want to end up with the problem of cryptocurrency. Right? So mining of Bitcoin, mining of Ethereum is very resource intensive. It requires these massive supercomputers and an enormous amount of power usage and things. Now then, our network uses the same kind of math, the quote-unquote Sudoku puzzles getting solved in cryptocurrency, and when making fun of cryptocurrency mining, you're solving a lot of Sudoku puzzles. The same thing is happening with Nym. Now, then the thing what we want to avoid is we're not trying to mine anything. We're not trying to mine a cryptocurrency or do anything like that. We're just trying to validate connections on the network. So we're trying to encourage people to do the Sudoku puzzles, but we're doing that for the purpose of making the network more private, more secure. So it's a very different incentive structure than cryptocurrency.
But
so,
still getting compensated with some form of token.
Think of it as more like a bus pass.
Okay. So you get the pass and you can travel on the bus.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's sort of like imagine being a bus driver. Like if you make a bus and you become a bus driver and you drive on the bus, then you get tickets that you can ride on the bus with. So that's essentially what it is. So it's complicated, and most people, like the average person, isn't going to have to deal with any of that stuff. This is for the infrastructure and the backbone in terms of like growing it and expanding it.
So if the math and infrastructure is similar but the purpose is different, then let's talk about the cryptocurrency application of that.
Right.
You've been pretty vocal as a skeptic or critical about cryptocurrencies and the whole crypto culture that goes with it. Tell us about it.
So crypto people are annoying. I don't know how else to put it. They don't know what they're talking about. This is the first thing that I encounter with most people in the crypto space. They often don't know what they're talking about, but they're very excited about it. So that I think it sort of reminds me of American yuppies in the 80s. Like if you ever watched the film Wall Street with Michael
Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas. Yes.
Yeah. So Gordon Gekko, there's a lot of people who are like, hey, that guy, but crypto, right? Yeah. So that's what's going on, is that people view this as like a scheme in order to get rich or find any kind of pretzel of logic in order to justify their interest in crypto. It has become a cultural phenomenon for some fairly wealthy people, and also people who who think that getting rich and building up their profile is like a good thing. And I don't know. I just don't like any of it. I don't see cryptocurrency as meeting a particular immediate need. Anytime that you use a currency, it involves tracking and exchange of goods and services and all this other stuff. And it's just there's a lot of extra there's a lot of extra steps being added to do something very simple. And it's just it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But from a math perspective, I'm still interested. I'm, as somebody who works with math, as somebody who works with technology, I have an interest in cryptography. It's just the currency bit I just find, and the culture around it, especially from people who don't know what they're talking about. Because there are people who are into cryptocurrency that I can have a conversation with. And it started to become clear to me probably about 6 or 7 years ago that because I kind of waved it off as like a fad, and I still think it is, in the grand scheme of things, a bit of a fad, but it's obviously something that's going to be around for a while. And this is not the first iteration of it, and then it's not going to be the last iteration of it. We are going to have to live with cryptocurrency in the future. But I'm not like, oh my gosh, this is something that everybody should invest in and get all excited about. I'm like, okay, yes, this is a thing, and it's going to be developed, and we may, and I would like to be able to find new tools that use the backbone and the infrastructure of blockchain, because I think that there is a lot of potential there, but there's so much energy being spent on just nonsense, and it alarms me.
So. I don't know if you follow the news, but on Thursday, the city of Lugano in southern Switzerland has announced a plan to become a sort of crypto center of Switzerland, maybe even of Europe. And as part of that, they essentially took Bitcoin and Tether, which is another coin, and their own coin, Luga, and they turned them into a legal tender.
Yes.
El Salvador did the same last September nationwide.
Yeah.
What do you think of these initiatives?
I think that they are trying to regulate and trying to encourage people to with the idea that in the future, like some form of cryptocurrency that may have some state backing or may have some banking infrastructure or some kind of legal apparatus, like backing it up and making it a bit more stable than something that where you invest, where you invest in this nonsense like one day, and the next thing you know, it's either to the moon or it's nothing, it's worthless, it's not worth anything at all. So I think that it is trying to encourage people and get people used to it. I still don't think it personally. I don't think it's ready. I don't think cryptocurrency is ready for that yet. But we're going to see it, and you're going to see more of it, and it will become more normalized over time, I think. I would not be surprised if, especially with fiat currency being as volatile as it is right now, if cryptocurrency does become sort of a much more common thing. But we have to get past this point where we're building these gigantic supercomputer things off of dams in the middle of Kazakhstan. It's just not sustainable.
Kazakhstan, Ukraine, we're going to do a transition. It's not very elegant here. But just a few days before this festival started, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I'm going to ask you in a second about the tech side of that cyber war. But in general terms, as a former soldier who has been in the field, as a security analyst, how are you looking at what's happening now?
So I might have a background in this. So it's very specifically, before going to Iraq, our whole thing was like there are two training sets that you're given. Like, yes, the United States was in Iraq whenever I enlisted in the military. However, one of the things that we were also trained as analysts and focused a lot on, because the training material hadn't been updated yet, was a ground war in Europe. So here we go. Here we are.
So the scenarios are kind of familiar.
Yeah, they're very familiar. I knew. I literally just grabbed a map and I was like, okay, here's what they're doing, and it's all lined up. I know what's going on, and I've been training. I spent only three and a half years training for this, for this kind of thing to be able to tell people what's going on.
So what's going on?
So what's going on right now is that Russia decided that they wanted to invade Ukraine. And they did it from three sides. There were three main pushes with ground forces, mostly tanks and mechanized infantry. So think big, heavy armored vehicles. And they did this very quickly, and they moved in very quickly, and they gained a lot of ground. And then as soon as they started to extend themselves outwards a little bit, then the Ukrainians started to resist using small units, and they attacked. They started to use the missiles that they had been given, Stinger missiles for aircraft, Javelin missiles, and a couple other British variants that are a little bit cheaper, but just as good. And they started to combat and fight the Russian troops who were entering into Ukraine. And they've been bogged down, and they tried to encircle Kyiv and tried to take Kyiv. They tried to encircle Kharkiv, and they tried to take Kharkiv. They have not been able to take those two cities. They thought they would be able to do it very quickly, maybe within 72 to 96 hours, and they just failed, and now they're in a stalemate. And while the Russians are advancing, and they're advancing all across all across Ukraine in parts. Every time that they advance, they lessen their ability to supply themselves, and they lose a little bit more resources that they had. So they're getting increasingly boxed in and overextended, and they can only do this for so long before they run out of food, they run out of fuel, they run out of morale, and all while this is happening, they've not been able to maintain some kind of air superiority because they keep having missiles shot at their aircraft. The Ukrainian Air Force is still up somehow, so it's become this major ground war that's a stalemate, and a stalemate for Russia in terms of the amount of investment that they put into this invasion. They have essentially bogged down their entire invasion capability in this, to where they might actually, even beyond sanctions, set aside sanctions that the rest of the world is putting on Russia, like the war itself might bankrupt Russia itself, and very quickly, like very soon. Whenever the United States invaded Iraq, there was hardly as much resistance initially, and the United States has just logistics.
Bigger capacity.
Logistics. Yeah. Russia doesn't have any of that, so they're in a very tight spot. And I actually didn't think that they would go through with this invasion because it just makes no sense. Mm-hmm. From a military perspective, it's suicide. For them to try to do this. I thought maybe they could try to take the eastern part and maybe connect Crimea to the eastern part of Ukraine, which would be, I'm not advocating for that, but from a military perspective, that would make sense. Trying to take the whole thing is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I had the same analysis before they invaded, and I didn't think that it would actually go all the way. But you spoke about tanks and heavy artillery, and so it seems to me that this is a war that's at the same time ancient.
Yes.
The tanks and the trenches and the bombed out buildings, and it's also very modern. Cyber war and social media, and everything is live on video all the time, and digital disinformation. Tell us how you read the tech side of this war. Doesn't seem like cyber war has been deployed fully yet, or maybe the response is stronger than we thought. But talk to us about the tech side of this war.
Yeah, so we obviously saw a lot of disinformation in the run-up. The United States, and there was a lot of questions because, the United States and the UK were like, hey, the Russians are going to do this. And everybody, including myself, was like, all right, I'm not so sure. You've said some stuff in the past and it hasn't been true. And I'm thinking of the Iraq invasion, WMDs, 45 minutes, Iraq, Saddam, a lot of people have this stuff in their memory. So their credibility wasn't that high. That said, I think that it turned out to be somewhat fairly accurate. They seemed to know something that was good. They seemed to know more than everybody else, but they didn't sell it very well. They didn't try to sell it to anybody. They didn't try to tell anybody or convince anybody. Germany certainly was caught off guard. Ukraine was completely caught off guard. The misinformation, the disinformation certainly shaped people's perception of the ability and the belief that Russia would actually try to pull off this invasion. I think that the amount of disinformation that you see online is pretty staggering. A lot of it. So here's the thing. I know that people are very focused on hacking and cyber warfare and things like that. We're gonna take out power plants. We're gonna take out that stuff. Actually, has turned out to not be as powerful or as strong or as significant, even in a major war like this, which I think is pretty striking. It just goes to show how overhyped these capabilities have been, because even in the first 12 to 18 hours, we definitely saw what appears to be Russian attacks on Ukraine and potentially other infrastructure. Now, then people are still looking at the forensics. The Ukrainians aren't even looking at their forensics for this stuff because they're obviously trying to fight a ground war, a ground invasion right now. So nobody really knows what happened. But there are some guesses as to how significant some of the stuff was, and it seems to have had an impact for about 12 hours.
Yeah, but pretty superficial still. Websites down, denial of service, and a little bit. Infrastructure mostly was there.
No, I'm thinking anti-aircraft capability, anti-aircraft missile capabilities seem to be impacted. Radars seem to be impacted. The ability to have communications and power within their own military seem to be impacted. Now, whether that was cyber or whether or not that was sabotage, we don't know, because there's no investigation. There's not enough time to conduct an investigation. Something happened that may have been a cyber attack. We won't know. We probably won't know for quite some time. That said, the amount of time that it took to fix that and to get back into motion was relatively short. And I think that isn't as big a deal. But disinformation, far cheaper, far easier to get away with, and people seem to be doing it all the time. And the other thing is that once you start spreading disinformation as a bad actor, so I give you disinformation, you believe that, you start to spread misinformation because you don't know that it's disinformation. I'm sending this on bad faith, but it looks legit to you. Then you start spreading it to everyone that you know who then spreads it. So I leave and I pack up and I go and I disappear, but it's already out there, and it's also self-replicating. So that's the problem with misinformation and disinformation, is that it is designed to be viral. So it is essentially a virus that uses humans to share it, which is pretty powerful stuff if you think about it, you know. And yeah, like we all know this is happening, but it's extraordinarily cheap. It's very easy to do this stuff, and you don't have to break into anything, but it does require some skill in order to find information that is just grainy enough, or just hits that part of you and that emotional part of you, to click retweet or to click share with somebody without checking, without verifying, without thinking critically about, like, where did this come from?
One last question, and then we're going to take questions from the public. So I'm going to ask the staff to position a couple of microphones and just wait where they are. But
the French is okay.
So we'll see. Okay. But and questions can be asked in English and in French. But you know, still about the war in Ukraine, but a more political and moral aspect. Many are kind of pushing the argument that because of what happened in Iraq, where you served, the US doesn't really have a moral standing to comment and tell Russia what to do.
Yeah.
What do you answer to that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I know that you know, like I'm not saying Russia's right. I'm just saying that, you know, like this was the consequence of doing this thing 19 years ago. By doing this thing, you are essentially enabling somebody else who's a bad actor as well to come along and do this, which is the warning that everybody should have had then. Now, obviously, I was in middle school whenever Iraq invaded, or whenever the United States invaded Iraq. So, you know, I had no say in that. But, you know, by the time I got to Iraq, by the time I got to Iraq and learned sort of what was going on and everything, like it became clear to me what transpired in the years prior. And so I think that I don't think that the United States has this moral authority, and it keeps on trying to assert this moral authority, and I just don't think it works anymore. You know, I just don't think anybody, like even America, like I live in New York, so I'm around Americans all day, but on all sides of the political spectrum, and most people don't believe this stuff. They're like, what are you talking about? Like the U.S. is falling apart, you know, internally. Like why are we trying to assert like we're trying to spread democracy to the world? So, but yeah, I think that it is very, I think it's very disingenuous whenever the U.S. Tries to make these positions, honestly, it kind of hard. Like whenever the U.S. or NATO try to hijack the appeals by people in Ukraine, for instance, it always grates on me just a little bit, because you're like, okay, they're clearly asking for stuff, and they're clearly asking for support, and they're clearly asking for these things, but you're trying to hijack this for your own motives and for your own ambitions and for your own defense industries and whatnot. So yeah, like I come at it from a fairly skeptical position.
Okay, let's see if we have questions from the room. Est-ce qu'on peut lever voilà, parfait. There is a hand here. Keep your hand up so she can see you, and bring you a microphone. Just there in the middle.
Just in case. Maybe.
And then there was another one here. No? Okay, let's start with you. Yes.
Is it working? Yes. So I will try in English. If I don't reach the end, I will finish in French. So thank you for the debate. And I would ask, before the Ukraine crisis, we had this COVID crisis, and one of the things typical of this crisis was that many, like YouTube, Google, had a big, suppressed very much the contents of people having not the doxa meaning. So what I would ask, how is it that possible, and how is connected the Google, YouTube, etc.,
Right.
with the governments?
Yeah. So what happened, I think, is you had this situation where you had a public health crisis, which impacted so many different jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction across the United States, across Europe, across obviously China, and other like places. Sorry, I'm getting a little distracted here. But yeah, so you had a lot of these, debates and discussions ongoing about this public health crisis that was impacting people. So what happened was that over time, you start to see that there were these disingenuous actors who were trying to sort of hijack for their own purposes and try to insert a debate or a discussion into sort of a public health issue and politicize. There's like this movement or this effort to politicize everything. Right? Every single action in your daily life becomes this like political statement or whatever, this identifier, this like marker, that you're on the far left or you're on the far right and whatnot. So it's a very divisive sort of thing that's happening. So I think that that's sort of like what happened, and I think that companies started to step into a role a little late, in my opinion, since it had already started to spread like wildfire in terms of cutting down on active disinformation that eventually became misinformation in the online space. So they were trying to essentially put a Band-Aid over a problem that they looked the other way on and that they had a responsibility to do something about very early on. I think that I think that the reason why there was such a controversy about YouTube and Spotify, and I'm thinking of like Joe Rogan and whatnot, is because they were allowed to start doing this stuff in the first place. So it became the situation where you had very clear, actual debates and very clear, experts and people who had information. But then everybody just started showing up with like whatever opinions that they had, and were treated as though they were the same. And it just spread into this maelstrom of misinformation and disinformation. And I'm hoping that we can avoid that, with other future crises, because we have some big ones ahead of us. We have some really big ones.
Yes, unfortunately. Ici, third row.
Ici.
French, English.
Hi. So we talk a lot about the benefits of blockchain in terms of security and how
Yes.
it has a lot of benefits in terms of security. But my question is, since blockchain is known to be immutable, and it means that a lot of, users' history cannot be erased or at all, if anything.
Right.
So is blockchain really, in your opinion, a solution to privacy?
It is. It is, and that's a very good question, because the information that you're sharing across the network is not being stored in the ledger. However, as you pointed out, the actual packets, the transmission of data, the fact that something was sent from point A to point B was done through that way. But it is anonymized, and it uses the encryption to anonymize this. So even though you can see that there is something in the ledger, you could see, oh yeah, packet went from point A to point B. It is immutable, and it stays there forever. And you're right about that. Where I think it differs is that none of the information that's shared actually goes and is stored on the blockchain. So the actual connection itself is a separate connection. So I think I hope that answers your question on that, because I do want to clarify that, and I think we literally wrote an article that explained that. So.
Excellent discipline by the two for keeping the questions short. So let's continue that. Lady here. And then there in the back, yes.
Bonjour, merci, moi en français. Alors, ma question concerne ID, qui est très répandu. ID. Entreprise qui me sert abonnement télévision, c'est-à-dire la communication Internet. insiste d'abord pour me proposer une petite carte SIM contre mes données. Je dois me prendre une photo. Je dois photographier ma pièce d'identité. Ils me connaissent depuis des années pourtant. Et il insiste de créer ID check. En achetant les billets, d'ailleurs pour le festival aussi, il y a ID dans les autres pays. Petite ID qu'on croit qu'on est obligé, que c'est correct de donner, être transparent, mais c'est abusif,
Did you get the question?
Yes, I did.
Personal IDs and...
Yeah, so from what I understand, I've encountered this getting SIM cards in Germany, for instance. It's where the amount of information that I have to provide in order to function in daily life and daily society. So, you go to a website and you fill out this form. And you fill out this form and they ask you for this tons of information. And then you fill out a password, and it has to be a strong password. And then you get your two-factor authentication, so you have to have your phone. So yes, it is becoming this huge, very complicated thing, interacting with people online and in daily life, where you have to input so much information, not just about yourself, but also to keep track of all these different apps and things that maintain, that are there to protect you ostensibly, but also create this massive trail of paperwork, but also borrows people who don't have this stuff. And I think this is one of the problems that certainly in the US that we've been having, because it's less so in Europe, but in the US, starting off with documents and having documentation can be a very difficult process. So not everybody has an ID, not everybody has a passport, so they can't get the SIM card to get the phone number that they need for the two-factor to get to set up the account, the Facebook account that allows them to be able to access their Twitter account, that allows them to be able to access their bank account or their email. It's this huge web, and just starting out on it can be so difficult, especially if you don't come from if you don't come up from a background where these things are where these things are produced for you or given to you. So immigrants have a lot of problem, and I think that's one of the reasons why they create so many hurdles and bars in terms of obtaining this stuff. Like, I'm trying to get a post office box in New York, and I've obviously lived in the United States for a very, very long time, but I have to prove that I actually have a place in order to get a post office box, because they're trying to bar me or anyone else from being able to have a post office box and have an address where they can have mail sent to, unless they already have an address.
What do you make, Chelsea, of kind of coordinating national ID systems? So Estonia, for example, has a national ID card, a national ID platform, a national digital platform for all the government services and plenty of private services, and it's all centralized, all coordinated. It's all coherent and all coordinated. What do you make of these systems? Not many countries have that.
Yeah, not many countries have national ID card systems, but every country has a form of identification that's commonly used. So. Like, for instance, the United States is your driver's license. Like, not everybody drives, but everybody needs a driver's license in the U.S. in order to do anything. Otherwise, you need a passport or birth certificate. So, having a I don't think there's anything necessarily inherently wrong with a national ID card system. The problem is that it starts to get into this whole are you a citizen or not territory. And on top of that, it gets into this whole range of different problems with access to healthcare. What information does the government get to know about your name or your age or your gender? Gender marker changes and things. So it becomes this very complicated, convoluted process. So I think that adding additional identification requirements or documentation. If you already have the infrastructure that has multiple types of ID for people, it just adds an extra. It just becomes this extra hurdle and this extra complication. And I'm saying this from the U.S. perspective, because you can't do anything without a driver's license. Even if you don't, a lot of people I don't own a car. I rarely drive, but I have a driver's license.
That's your idea. So we have time for 3 or 4 more questions. There was one here. Do you already have a microphone? No. Keep your hand up so she can see you and bring your microphone. Yes.
Anglais, français.
Okay, so I actually have very limited knowledge when it comes to the technology of encryption, but I'm aware of the problems concerning like data, and I want to turn to alternatives and companies that like tend to protect my data, but it's so hard to actually like figure out which ones do. And the example I have is like Proton. It's a company based in Geneva. They're supposed to be secure encrypted, and then they end up selling or giving data to the police about climate demonstration, protesters. And so I was just wondering, what was your intake about like actually these companies that pretend to be safe, to protect your data, etc., and what they actually do, and if it's possible to, as a day-to-day person, like a regular person, to just like figure out which options are better, etc.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's two things. I have two answers to that, actually. The first answer is that you constantly have to be aware, and you constantly have to be on your toes with this kind of information. So in this instance, Proton Mail had a reputation, and it sort of got impacted it had its reputation impacted in terms of like saying, oh well, we don't provide information about our clients or our information to legal or to like legal like law enforcement or intelligence agencies or anything like that. But then eventually they did reveal it, or it got revealed. I forget which happened first.
Either, but they were kind of forced by the prosecutor to.
Yeah. So they were forced. They were forced to do so.
They had to do so.
Yeah, they were forced to do so. But still, that sort of goes against what they were saying. Yep. So there's a question as to how willing and how far and how much you can depend on certain institutions and certain organizations. I think that is definitely an area that is worthy of monitoring and staying on your toes about and being in a debate. One of the things that I like about Nym is that and Tor is that they're decentralized. So there isn't anybody to subpoena. Like there's nobody to send something to. So if you send a subpoena to Nym, you're okay, well, we got nothing. We have no records, So a lot of VPN services have the same thing where, they get a subpoena. I know that there are at least 3 VPN services that I know that have gotten subpoenas, not publicly, but they've gotten them recently, and they have nothing to comply with. They have no information to provide. So
let me turn the question around, maybe.
Okay. Well, I did have a second part.
Okay.
I had a second part to the thing, which is the second part of the question is in terms of your responsibility as an individual, you need to understand your risk. It's known as threat model, right? You have to understand what are you actually trying to protect? Because how much information do you want to know how much information you're putting out there, because you can't live in a society where you're not putting out any information at all, right? I encountered this problem myself. I have a TikTok. I'm not happy about it. I use it. I isolate it and I insulate it, and I'm aware of the risks that are involved in that, and I take precautions to be able to use that because of who I am and what I do for a living. So it's like on a separate phone, and it's just not attached to anything, and I just browse it and I look at funny videos or weird stuff, or listen to weird music and things like that. So you don't have to cut yourself off from all of society, even if that information is but you can be aware in it. You could be aware of what your risks are, like on who your threats are and who's trying to obtain your information, and try to protect yourself in that way. Because it doesn't mean that you can't use Instagram. It doesn't mean that you can't use TikTok. It doesn't mean that you can't interact with the world. But you should be aware of your risks and what information you post out there and how dangerous it is. And this was just something that happened on Twitter today, where a good example is 2 U.S. senators posted a photograph of a call they had with President Zelensky in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government did not want anybody to know that he was there because he was at a particular location that the Russians could identify, and they could live target him in that location. They didn't want the world to know that, but there they were. They posted this thing on Twitter, and they posted a photograph because they wanted it to be up there. So posting that thing up there, is obviously a security violation, a pretty big one, right? In terms of like combat operations in a head of state in a war zone. So
to also expect two senators to know about that, but
yeah.
Chelsea, in terms of what we individuals can do, there's a big push by tech companies for us users to put our information in the cloud.
Yep.
Cloud yes or cloud no?
No.
Okay, that's clear.
Yeah. Well, I want to be clear. Like, there are ways. It's not as simple as that. There are ways to control the information that you have. So if you're a small business or you are a medium-sized business, there are options that you have. Even as an individual, if you can just choose not to put things on the cloud and back stuff up locally, or in the alternative, if you're a small business, there is a service that these companies who claim cloud services and provide these things, you can just ask for edge computing. Edge computing is how you get your own cloud that's local, that's in your shop, that's in your house, that's in your office, your warehouse or your factory or whatever. And it's all there, and they provide all those services, and they give you an instruction manual, and they give you a professional, and you're able to do it locally. So, like there is a middle ground, and I think that decentralized cloud hosting, edge computing is sort of the sexy term is edge computing, but
okay.
That is an alternative to cloud.
Okay, I think we have time for 3 or 4 more questions. So there is one on the back there, just all on the back. The man with the raised hand there. Where is the microphone? Yeah, keep your hands up. Yes.
Firstly, I want to say that I'm very happy that you're working improving our privacy in the next generation, or trying. But my biggest question actually about it is, how would you deal when the tech companies, the tech players put obstacles to you? And I'm asking the question based on experience or personal experience with the Sailfish OS, an attempt for a secure operating system for your mobile phone, that the big companies essentially they killed it by simply playing one trick. You cannot do the two-step identification or buy something with your Visa because Google Play will not allow you to install it there.
Yeah.
So,
how do you do that?
Yeah, how do you get around that? I'm aware of these problems, and yeah, like these are very common things. Like Apple has a very similar situation with their stuff, so it becomes a big problem. Like the app stores. And it just became a problem, like the amount of power that the app stores have in terms of like providing applications and services, which is one of the reasons why I'm so pro open source, because you can't depend on Apple. Like it happened with the sanctions recently, where in response to the sanctions, and to a criticism, the Russian government just cut off the App Store. So now people in Russia that have iPhones and Androids, they can't get apps at all. Like they're completely shut off. They're completely cut off. So I think that the centralization of having applications and services, especially for mobile platforms, is a huge problem. It is what in security we call a single point of failure. Where and then this is one of the reasons why I am very pro open source. You should be able to, in theory, you don't have to be an expert and have to do this, but you should be able to, in theory, take all of the code, compile it, put it onto a phone without having to download anything or interact with anybody. That is how I view the world. That is how I view the computing world. That's the way it was when I was 15 years old, and that's the way it should be again.
Let's stay on the back for a second, then we come down here. There was a hand raised somewhere there on, yeah. Then we come back to the front.
In French. Ok, yeah. Je voulais juste savoir comment ça se fait qu'on entend si peu parler de la Chine dans le conflit entre l'Ukraine et la Russie, étant donné que c'est un pays qui, militairement parlant et économiquement parlant, est très influent.
Yes.
China.
So China.
And China and
very,
Ukraine.
Very good question. China is laying low. China does not.
Doesn't know really what to do.
They don't know what to do. They I think that this is my personal opinion, my personal assessment. I have nothing specific to back this up, but my personal evaluation is that China was blindsided by the invasion. They did not expect this to happen quite as intensely. I think that they knew that it was going to happen, but I don't think that they knew quite to the scale. And they are certainly seeing it go badly for the Russians from their perspective. So I think that they are laying low, staying quiet, and thinking and having second thoughts about any kind of plays on trying to bring Taiwan back into the fold and unify China or anything like that. So I do think that they are watching sort of Russia make this very strategic mistake, and Russia could still I'm not saying that Russia's going to lose. They could still win somehow. I don't know how, but they still could. But China is looking at it and they're going, oh, this is actually way messier than we ever thought this would be. So they're being very quiet. They're not going to get involved. I suspect that they are not going to get involved. And given the fact that they have also jumped on the sort of imposition of some sanctions to Russia as well, that they are having to play ball with sort of the rest of the world and sort of condemning this invasion. So
They're probably not expecting the strong reaction either. So it's like,
yeah,
as the fictional president said a couple of months ago, sit tight and assess, right? That's the position of China. Let's come down here to the front. 1, 2, and then was a hand here, 3. Yes. Let's maybe start with the lady here.
A lot of questions.
Yes. And I asked the team to tell me how much time we still have, so make me a sign or something. Yes, please.
Oui, merci beaucoup de votre présence et de vos réponses. Oui, ma question c'est, est-ce que les utilisateurs de Google ont la possibilité de faire bugger le système de traçage, et si oui, de quelle manière? Merci.
How do we trick Google?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's what Nym's for. That's what this whole project is for. It's supposed to prevent that from happening. So that's what we're trying to do. That's the whole point of Nym. That's the whole point of Tor, is to be able to try to prevent this kinds of information from being made and from being, and to also provide a backbone or a foundation for new tools.
Now, I think part of the question was also about, can I, as a normal user today, kind of, make sure that Google doesn't actually create an accurate profile of me?
No.
Okay. There we have answer.
No.
2 more questions. The lady here and the lady there. Let's start with the lady here.
So I've been trying to leave Apple for years, and I keep asking people, right here.
Oh, hi.
In front of you. Hi. I've been trying to leave Apple for years, and I keep asking people to please create something. I'm not a person who deals with that kind of stuff. I can't create it. But people who know about it, I keep asking, can you create something that is going to replace how I sync my iPhone with my Apple computer? And everybody tells me it's impossible.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is outrageous. We have to have that as open source.
Yes.
That's one thing. The second thing, and this is really important, politically, Modi, for example, is building this big thing about in India. He's the president of India.
Yes, I
He's
know.
doing demonetization. Well, the demonetization means that everybody in India, illiterate or not, has to have an ID card and buys with the ID card. Everybody, absolutely everybody in that country is going to be traced.
Yeah. Was there a question?
What do you think about it? What do we do?
This is why I do this stuff. Why I talk about these things. These are problems. These are problems that I encounter on a daily basis. I mean, like I have I think 5 phones now, just so I can try to protect myself. It's expensive.
Kind of spreading yourself
It's
over 5 different
expensive.
identities.
Yeah, but I'm also testing things and I'm coming up with solutions. And I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated, and I'm an expert in this. I get paid to do this stuff, and it's hard. So the answer is that billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in massive amounts of infrastructure and in massive tools throughout the entire supply chain, and sort of how we build. How you get from a bunch of minerals in the ground to a glass and steel electronic device that's in your pocket every day. That whole process has been designed in such a way to ensure that you are locked in a certain way. And the only way to resist that is to come up with an alternative for that. But you can't really come up with an alternative for that in one single swoop, in one single step. So you constantly have to keep pulling the existing infrastructure more and more towards what you're wanting it to do. If you don't, because you can't build that infrastructure and build that whole thing out of whole cloth overnight. It can be done, but it can't be done immediately.
One last question, the lady here in the front.
Hello. So my question was that, as we saw in the movie, sometimes Google has access to information that is not even shared within the private spheres. For example, when it comes to suicidal thoughts and stuff like that. And I was wondering what you think the role of technology is when it comes to maybe mental health and such issues.
I don't think it has any role. That's my personal assessment and my personal opinion. And the reason why, and some people criticize me for this. I've made this point before, is that the same tools that can be used to determine whether or not somebody has suicidal ideation can be used to determine whether or not somebody is planning on going to a protest or planning on going to this has been proven. If you have the tools to be able to predict this thing, it can also be, and it can also be used potentially as a blackmail tool or a weapon against you. For instance, somebody might say, "Oh, well, you had suicidal ideation at this one point in time," and this comes out in a contentious political election or something like that. So I think that it does alarm me a little bit. I am very skeptical of these kinds of tools and these kinds of ideas. I do not think that technology should play a role in mental health. I think that a mental health provider should be the person that you were talking to. So if you are in a state that provides you with mental health services, or a government that provides you with those things, that should be the rubric and the system that you have. However, where I live in the United States, you're not given that. So it should be, but we'll figure it out. Usually it's just send cops over to shoot you.
Yes, Okay, sorry for those who still had their hand up, but it's 9:30, so just one quick last question, and it is about this.
Ooh, this is turning into a pop quiz.
Your actions in the past and also now show that one single person can really really have impact and can change things.
Sure.
How can we encourage more people to believe that in their small and big way, even as an individual, they can have an impact?
Because, think about it. Just think about it. Observe your environment. Think about it. How can I make a difference? And I don't mean this in the philanthropy sense. That I can barely speak English myself. So, so good on me for, good luck with French, right? But yeah, from a philanthropy position, I'm not talking about donating money. I'm not talking about donating time or anything like that. I'm talking about what can you do, risky things that you can do sometimes. Direct action, is sort of what it's called in some political circles. What can you do as an individual in your space? And I can't tell you that. I can't tell you specifically what that is, but you can figure that out in your particular way. Like just think of, because like every single action, and more importantly, every single inaction, every time you don't do something or you don't say something is a political act in itself. You are essentially, like if everything is going to be like this political debate in this world today, like think of it, every single like decision that you have as sort of am I doing something that goes against my values or not? Obviously, you have to know what your risks are and how willing you are to take these risks and do certain things and how much of an impact and the risk to other people that it has. But that is something that is up to every single individual person, and every single individual person has somewhere in their life this power.
Chelsea, thank you for coming to the stage and being so generous with your knowledge. Chelsea Manning.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Bring her back for a picture, but this was the end of this session, so thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Stay there, don't go away. Don't go away. You're going to be in the picture. If I'm here, you cannot see anyone then. You can do a selfie too, Okay, thank you all.